Hi. So I'm Sara, and as Nadina said, I will be speaking to you tonight about writing for different audiences. So before we get started, who am I? Well, I'm Sara. I've been in Israel since 1992 with a few minor detours, such as a few years I spent getting my PhD in linguistics from Stanford, which I finished in 2019. I did experimental work on understanding language in context, which has come in handy writing language in context. I've been a UX writer here at Wix since. I decided that, unlike Jenny, long form was not for me, and the confined space of a tooltip was much more comfortable and easy to deal with. So, when I started at Wix, I wrote for the Wix app market, where users can go to add apps to their sites. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And also for the Developer Center. And now I write for the Wix editor, where users come to create their sites. Thanks, Nadina. Okay, since this is a talk about different audiences, I figured I'd start with just a quick run through of who my various audiences have been at different times, and we'll go into detail as we get farther into the talk. So when I was at the app market, the main audience I was writing for was Wix site owners who wanted to add apps to their site. And at the Dev Center, I was writing mostly for third-party developers of the apps that went into the market, but also for Wix developers developing internally as well. And now at the editor, I write for do-it-yourself site builders, small business owners, agency designers building sites for clients, and everybody in between. Okay, so before we get started, just a quick look at what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to start with a really quick intro about Wix Voice, since Jenny already covered that so nicely, and then take an in-depth look at 2 examples of writing for different audiences, and then conclude what we all learned from that experience. Cool. Okay, so as Jenny said, in order to keep all 60 of us writers sounding consistent and cohesive, like we're one person instead of 60 different people, we came up with the guiding principles of the Wix Voice, such as being straightforward, inspiring, professional, supportive, and conversational. And while we're writing in that voice, we try to keep our users at the forefront of our mind, taking into account their intent, their state of mind, where they are in their journey, and what they're trying to get out of this whole experience. Now, that's all well and good when we're writing for one set of users. We can keep in mind their state of mind and their journey, and et cetera. But what happens when there's more than one set of users? For that, we have to dig a little deeper, and we will take a look at what that means through some examples. Okay, so first example from the app market. I've looked at apps from both sides now. What is the app market, just to give us a better understanding before we look at the text? The Wix app market, as I said, allows site owners to extend the functionality of their sites by adding apps developed by Wix or third parties. And these could be anything from shipping solutions like drop shipping or print on demand, marketing, analytics, through to simple widgets like countdown timers or business hours, anything that can help them grow and run their business. And each app in the market has a market listing where site owners can find out all the information they need in order to decide whether this is an app that they want to add to their site. And all of that information in the listing is set up by the developer in the Dev Center. So you get like both sides of this same information. So the listing is set up in the Dev Center, and it appears in the app market. We've got the same information in both places, but it's being consumed by very different users. The listing in the market the market listing is input in the Dev Center by the developers who are trying to market their apps, but it's viewed by the site owners in the app market who are trying to like find apps quickly and easily and decide whether these are things that they're interested in. So I'm going to focus on one piece of the market listing. In the Dev Center, we refer to it as the app audience section, which I figured was sort of appropriate for tonight's talk. In the app market, it appears in a little box under the promotional images. We added this to the Dev Center a couple years ago, and it was a really interesting challenge dealing with the duplicity of this information, like both sides of the picture. Okay, so while I was working on this, I kept coming back to a certain set of questions. Who are the users? What are they trying to do? How do they talk about this stuff? In the Dev Center, our users are developers. They're tech savvy. They're experts at developing apps, but they're not necessarily familiar with our system and how to, what information they need to provide and where to provide it and how to do that. In the app market, the users are site owners trying to set up their websites for their business. They're looking for the tools to help them accomplish that. And each app has to give them the right information in order to make the decision whether they want it or not. Okay, so let's look at some differences between the input in the Dev Center and the listing in the market. So we start out with the installation requirements in the Dev Center. We ask developers, is your app dependent on specific Wix products? Whereas in the app market, that shows up just as site requirements. Wix stores. So first of all, we see like simple vocabulary differences. We get installation requirements and dependencies, which is a little bit more technical and relevant for the developers than just the site requirements that the user gets. Then we get this drop down of checkboxes. A user's site needs to have one of the following products, and they can check whatever is relevant, which shows up as a bulleted list in the app market. And the app market users get a little bit of extra information in a tooltip. Make sure your site meets these requirements before adding this app. So first of all, we see a perspective shift here. In the Dev Center, we are talking about a user's site, whereas in the app market, we're just talking about your site because we're talking directly to those users. And we'll make that picture even a little more complicated in a second. And then also, we get very different UI based on the goal that the user is trying to accomplish. So we get checkboxes in the Dev Center and just a list in the app market, which is a lot easier to navigate and read and hopefully isn't like a mile long. Okay, so that was the first section. Now I want to skip to the languages section. And so there's the general input for a list of languages, but then there's this checkbox at the bottom, which is the more interesting part of the screen. So in the Dev Center, we get a checkbox for the developers. This app lets users rewrite the text visible to their site visitors. And then a little bit more information on what this is all for and what they might want to do with this. Check this box if all text that is visible to site visitors can be changed and therefore translated by the site owner. If the developers check this box, then you get that note in the market listing. You can translate all app content displayed on your site into any language. So first of all, we get a different level of detail. The developers really need to understand what are the consequences of checking this box, what do they have to fulfill in order to be able to check it. And the app market, we can focus on a simpler goal of you can translate all your app content. And then there's this very different perspective as well here. So we have in the Dev Center 3 layers of users. We've got the developers themselves who are making apps for site owners who then have content that is displayed to the site visitors. And so we need a lot of space to explain those levels there, layers. In the app market, we can simplify that because we're talking directly to the site owners. So it's the site owners and the visitors. They don't care so much about the developers, thankfully. And then we also get a different UI based on the goal, where we get the checkbox versus expressed as the note in the app market. Okay, so what do we see throughout here? We try to preserve the same Wix voice in both places, where we're straightforward and professional, conversational, but we adjust our vocabulary and our perspective based on who the users are who we're talking to at any given moment. We take into account their different goals with the differences in UI, the amount of information they need, and how we present it to them. So we saw a place where you had two sets of users with different goals, but dealing with exactly the same information. Now, in the next example, A Tale of Two Tours, I want to take a different look at things where we're going to have two sets of users coming to the same place with the same goal, but coming from different places with different knowledge. So before we can really dive in, let's just step back. What is the editor? The editor is where users come to create and design their sites. At Wix, there are two ways to create a site. One is to use the editor, where you choose a template, and then you can change all the content in the template, make it your own. Or you can use ADI, which lets you answer a few questions and get a custom-built site with content and images that are related to your business. It's a fairly simple process, and you get a beautiful site out of it. What does that look like? Just to give you a certain idea, you fill in some info, you pick a theme, you select a home page, you add some pages, and voila, you end up with a beautiful site. But, okay, so what are the differences between these two methods? In ADI, you get a custom-built site that's based on like sections of content and a fairly simple interface like the creation process, but it's not super flexible. You can't customize every single element. You can't adjust everything exactly the way you might want to. The editor, on the other hand, you start from a template, and then with drag and drop editing, everything's fully customizable. You can change the settings for everything, but it's also a little bit complex. So we wanted to create a product that gives you the best of both worlds, that lets you take the ease of use of ADI and also the customizability of the editor. And that product we call Editor 2.0. So, okay, that's great for new sites. We tested this new product, everybody liked it, or most people liked it, good enough. We decided that it's good to go. But what about all the millions of users who've already designed sites on the old editor and an old ADI? They need to end up in the new editor. So for that, we decided that in order to ease their transition into this new product, we should create a tour to introduce users to Editor 2.0, help them make the most of the new product. But there's two sets of users here, and they know very different things. They're coming from very different places. So ADI users are coming from these custom-built sites. They have sections, but they're used to this simple but less flexible mode of editing. Whereas the editor users are coming from this template with full flexibility, but don't know some of these like ease of use tools that we give them in ADI. So together, they're coming, both of them, into Editor 2.0, and we have to help them navigate the new product. So the way we did that was two completely separate tours, depending on where they were coming from, where they were migrating their site from. And so I want to run through some of the screens of the tour, how we used the information that we had about each group of users to decide what to talk about to each one, and what was important for them to know. So for ADI users, we started off this tour with meet your new editor. It's a completely new product. They haven't seen this interface before. They come in and it looks completely different from what they're used to. So now drag and drop elements and fully customize the design of your site. You've got this new flexibility that you didn't have before. Whereas for editor users, it's your new editor experience, which is, I mean, cool and exciting, but it's not a whole new world. It's just an update. Introducing sections, a new way to organize the content on your site. You have a new feature. This is like the main new thing we're introducing. And that's going to be the focus of this tour for editor users. So for ADI users, we tell them, add more to your site. Customize your sections and pages, concepts that they're already familiar with from ADI, with text and buttons and other elements that now they can add each one individually and customize everything as they go. Whereas for editor users, we focus in on the sections. Add sections to your page. Choose a pre-designed section or add a blank one to create your own. Now they have this new feature called sections that they can use to manipulate as chunks of content, which they couldn't do before. For ADI users, we tell them fully customize elements. Select any element to change its style and content. Whereas for editor users, we're more focused on the new feature, update content quickly. A single place to edit all your section content like images and text. There's a new panel, which ADI already had, which lets editor users shows content a section at a time, and you can just go and edit each field through the panel all at once, which you could do in ADI and you couldn't do before in editor. So we needed to let editor users know about this new feature. Okay, and then for editor, this is like the most subtle distinction here, and sort of maybe most interesting. So it looks at the surface, it looks like they're pretty similar. We've got drag and drop any element for ADI, and drag and drop elements for editor. Same thing, except now if you read the small print, it gets to be very different. They diverge. So for ADI users, we tell them, place an element anywhere, then resize or rotate it for the exact look you want. Again, we're focused in on, you can customize every detail of your site, which you couldn't do before. Whereas for editor users, we, again, focus in on how these elements that they already know about play with sections. Each element is attached to a section, but you can easily move them from one section to another. And again, relate it back to what's new to them. So to summarize all of that, we had two groups of users that got to the same place with the same intent. They all just want to edit their site, but from two completely different places. ADI users had a completely different interface, but they had sections in quick edit. They did not have drag and drop. They had limited customization capabilities. Whereas editor users had a similar interface to what they're getting now, but no sections and no quick edit, so they have to understand how the tools that they're already familiar with fit into this new world. Cool. So I just want to wrap all that up with going back to the questions we started out with and how we implement this in our writing. So bottom line is we keep our voice consistent. We're always Wix. We're always the same person talking to all of these different groups of users. But we keep in mind at every point, who are our users? What are they trying to achieve? Where are they coming from? And what do they already know? And we use that to tailor each experience to the people who are consuming it. Thanks.